Can you believe someone actually called the police on me for trespassing to the pool I was perfectly entitled to use? Would you be shocked if I told you she even screamed it across the deck, phone in hand, as though she were performing in front of a live studio audience? That's exactly what happened, and let me assure you, none of the onlookers had a clue how far this feud would go. The real surprise is that I never belonged to her so-called HOA, yet there I was, accused of breaching rules no one had the authority to enforce on me. The moment she dialed 911, I realized I'd wandered into something bigger than a minor neighborly dispute. She had no idea I possessed the legal ammunition and the will to stand my ground. Little did she know, her attempt at humiliating me would expose secrets, transform the entire neighborhood, and trigger a chain reaction that would lead to her ultimate downfall. My name is Alan Moore. I'm 34 years old, a freelance landscape architect, and someone who thought a peaceful suburban life awaited me when I moved into Lakeview Estates 3 months ago. Located right next to Sunny Creek, a neighborhood governed by a strict homeowners association, Lakeview Estates lacks those formal HOA guidelines many folks either love or dread. From day one, I was told by my landlord, Rowan Carter, that my rental home included a special covenant. It granted full access to a particular swimming facility that happened to be under the purview of the Sunny Creek HOA. I remember reading the lease agreement line by line, noticing a clause that read, "Tenant of property at Lakeview Estates, 27, shall enjoy community pool privileges as per existing arrangement from June 2013. It seemed straightforward. I had official, documented rights to use that pool. One scorching Saturday morning, I strolled down the sidewalk, beach towel flung across my shoulder, determined to enjoy the water. The heat was relentless, and I could practically see the waves of shimmer rising from the asphalt. Families milled about in their yards, children ran up and down the street, and everything felt downright wholesome. I turned the corner, spotting the gleaming water of the Sunny Creek pool just a block away. My plan was simple: dip into the refreshing waters, lounge in the sun for a bit, and then head home. Absolutely nothing suggested I was about to spark a showdown that would rattle the entire neighborhood. As soon as I laid my towel on a reclining chair, I noticed a woman in a pristine tennis outfit marching toward me with a stern expression. Her carefully highlighted hair was styled in a bob, and she sported immaculate sneakers that didn't look like they'd ever scuffed an actual tennis court. She wore large sunglasses, likely designer, perched on the tip of her nose, giving her an air of self-appointed authority. Before I had the chance to greet her, she loudly announced I was trespassing on private property. "Excuse me," she barked. "This pool is for Sunny Creek HOA residents only, and I've never seen you here, so you better have a good explanation." I found myself momentarily speechless. I politely explained I wasn't a member of Sunny Creek's HOA, but I had official documentation granting me the right to be there. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't bother to examine my lease papers, but instead reached for her phone, pressed 3 digits, and started talking in that dreaded Karen tone. "Yes, 911. We have a trespasser at the Sunny Creek pool who refuses to leave the premises. I need an officer dispatched immediately." My cheeks burned with embarrassment as several swimmers swiveled their heads, watching the commotion unravel. I didn't want an unnecessary confrontation, so I grabbed my things and left. The glances from the bystanders, a mix of curiosity and silent judgment, clung to me with every step. My plan for a peaceful day at the pool had morphed into a public spectacle, courtesy of an HOA president who wielded her position like a personal scepter. On the walk home, I felt more confused than outraged. Rowan had assured me everything was legit, so why was I forced out as though I'd been squatting on a random property? Something told me there was more to this than simple oversight. That evening, I dropped Rowan a quick call, recounting the incident in detail. He sounded appalled, letting me know in no uncertain terms that the access arrangement was fully legitimate. I was one of the original investors in that development. He said, "When they built those homes and that pool, we signed a covenant that my property, even though it's considered part of Lakeview Estates, would always retain usage rights." Sienna Kay, the current HOA president, is fully aware of it. She's been trying to bully out anyone who's not strictly within her domain. Hearing that, I was both relieved and irritated. Who on earth did she think she was, ignoring documented agreements and terrorizing people who had every right to be there? At Rowan's urging, I went through my lease once more. There, in clear, typed language, stood the clause establishing my guaranteed right to the amenities, including that pool. He forwarded me scanned copies of the original covenant, complete with legal stamps and signatures from prior HOA boards. Each time the covenant had been reviewed, it was renewed without debate. At least on paper, I tried to envision Sienna flipping through those very documents and then deciding to disregard them. A wave of defiance rose inside me. I wasn't about to let this slide. Still, I was cautious enough to consult a friend, Linda Cheng, a local attorney well-versed in real estate disputes. She went through my documents, nodded in approval, and told me everything was enforceable in court if necessary. Linda explained that Sienna, or any other board member, had zero basis to revoke my pool access. She also hinted that people who behaved like Karen often do so because they successfully intimidate neighbors who lack knowledge of their own legal rights. "Don't back down," Linda said. "Just present your paperwork calmly, and if she pushes, you have the law on your side." The following day, as I was sorting through my mailbox, I bumped into Janet Moore, my next-door neighbor. She had an easygoing demeanor, but when I mentioned my conflict with Sienna, Janet's shoulders sagged in exasperation. She invited me to step onto her porch, then filled me in on an entire pattern of overreach by Sienna. She once tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of mulch, despite the fact that my property isn't even under her HOA's control, Janet said with an eye roll. She hates not having total jurisdiction, so she pretends the boundaries are more extensive. Janet also whispered about rumored financial irregularities in Sienna's past, specifically a mishandling of funds at a different HOA where she once served. Nothing ever came of the allegations officially, but it left her old community in turmoil. As soon as Janet mentioned the possibility of money mishandling, something clicked. Was Sienna not just a meddling busybody, but possibly orchestrating a bigger plan? The suggestion hovered in my mind. Maybe her obsession with controlling everything around the pool was just the tip of a more elaborate scheme. I resolved then and there that I would reassert my rights, not just for me, but for all the neighbors Sienna had bullied over the years. One day later, armed with a binder of printed documents, I returned to the pool. My heart thudded a little faster than normal, but I reminded myself I had all the necessary proof of entitlement. The area was relatively calm, only a few swimmers enjoying the water under the bright midday sun. I spread my towel on a chair, took a seat, and braced myself, anticipating her approach. Sure enough, Sienna appeared, wearing that same tennis outfit, face twisted in annoyance. She sneered, "Yeah, back. I told you once. You are not permitted here. This is your final warning." This time, I lifted my binder, gently flipping pages until I found the relevant agreement. I tried to hand it to her. She refused to look. Instead, her finger hovered over her phone screen, and in moments the second police call was underway. "Officers, I have a trespasser ignoring repeated notices. This is a private facility exclusively for our HOA members. Please come immediately. She ended the call, clearly believing a show of force would send me packing. Several onlookers watched this exchange from across the pool, uncertain whether to intervene or mind their own business. I sat quietly, waiting for the authorities to arrive. My strategy was straightforward. I'd hand them my lease, the covenant, and let them see for themselves. Maybe Sienna thrived on intimidation, but I intended to meet her tactics calmly. When 2 officers appeared, I greeted them politely, introduced myself, and showed them the legal documentation that explicitly granted me pool privileges. They read the pages, nodded, and pulled Sienna aside for a private discussion. She was speaking in a hushed but vehement tone, gesturing at me as though I were some kind of dangerous criminal lurking around the kiddie pool. Eventually, the older officer came over and handed back my papers with an apologetic half-smile. "Sir, it looks like you have the documentation in order. Ms. K can't prevent you from using this facility given the covenant on record. I suggest you keep a copy of these papers on you whenever you come here to avoid misunderstandings," he said in a resigned manner, as if he had handled similar HOA dramas far too often. Sienna stood a few feet away, seething, her jaw set in a tense line. She didn't apologize or show any sign of backing down, though. All she said was, "You'll regret this," before stomping off, leaving a swirl of tension in her wake. After that, I refused to budge. I spent my time at the pool as I had planned, dipping in and out of the water, occasionally glancing around to see if anyone else objected. People mostly appeared relieved the confrontation had eased. They resumed swimming or chatting with their friends. I felt a small surge of triumph. Sienna's intimidation had failed this round, but the sense of victory was short-lived. 2 days later, an official-looking envelope from Sunny Creek Homeowners Association arrived in my mail. The letter demanded $500 in fines for unauthorized facility use, disturbing HOA members, and failure to abide by community guidelines. I almost laughed at the absurdity, especially since Linda had explicitly warned me that the HOA had zero jurisdiction over my property. Nevertheless, it was concerning how brazenly they tried to extort money. I immediately scanned the letter, forwarded it to Linda, and asked, "Have we entered the twilight zone?" She confirmed that it held no legal weight. Just another intimidation tactic. She advised me to keep everything documented in case it escalated. The next few days, I found myself talking to other neighbors who had faced similar fiascos with Sienna. They described episodes of receiving warnings about unapproved porch lights, inadequate lawn maintenance, or even parking on the street, all of which were either outside the HOA's actual boundary or contradicted the fact that many of these individuals weren't even part of her domain. Janet arranged a small gathering at her house. Among those who showed up was Bill, an elderly gentleman who said Sienna had once tried to tow his car because it looked old and might depreciate community values. Another neighbor, Maria, confided that Sienna had threatened her with legal action for planting a non-compliant rose variant in a spot nowhere near the official HOA perimeter. The stories painted a disturbing pattern. Sienna's obsession was about exerting power beyond legitimate lines, scaring people into obedience, and possibly diverting community funds for her own agendas. A few nights after that group conversation, I received an unexpected call from Kevin Yang, a newly elected Sunny Creek board member who whispered, "I need to talk to you privately." We agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. Kevin looked nervous, checking over his shoulder every time the door opened. Over sips of hot coffee, he explained that Sienna had gained her board president role through manipulative campaigning, forging alliances, and making others indebted to her. "She's relentless," he said. But there are aspects of her activities that don't add up. She's obsessed with redefining the boundaries to expand Sunny Creek's oversight. I found old maps in the association records that don't match the new ones she circulated. Some lines were redrawn in ways that quietly annexed parts of Lakeview Estates. Kevin suspected Sienna had an underlying financial motive. Expanded territory would mean more dues or greater control over future development projects. Suddenly, it all clicked into place for me. Sienna's quest to remove me from the pool might be part of a bigger push to forcibly incorporate my property into her HOA, or to at least act as if it was part of her kingdom. I told Kevin about the letter I received, the calls to the police, and the fine that had no legal standing. He shook his head in dismay, adding that Sienna had tried similar tactics with others, but never so blatantly. He suspected she felt threatened by my direct knowledge of the covenant, a covenant that, if recognized openly, undermined her campaign of total authority. The conversation with Kevin was illuminating. It also showed how alone he felt within the board. He wanted to do the right thing but feared repercussions. I assured him that if he had evidence, we could bring it forward, either at the next HOA meeting or to the county records office. Over the next few days, he quietly slipped me scanned copies of altered boundary maps and potential financial anomalies, large sums paid to consultants who seemed suspiciously linked to Sienna's family. He also found references to a fiasco from 10 years ago involving a property dispute in which Sienna might have forged documents to gain a portion of land that wasn't hers. None of the neighbors had the full puzzle, but we were piecing it together. When I confronted Rowan about these rumors, he sighed and revealed how, back when the neighborhood was first developed, Sienna had tried to purchase his property at a lowball price to expand her own holdings. He turned her down, deciding to rent the house out instead. Soon after, strange boundary adjustments appeared on county maps, supposedly signed by Rowan, but obviously forged. He managed to get them reversed, but only after a headache of paperwork and threats of legal action. The resolution included a formal covenant ensuring he would keep permanent rights to the pool, an arrangement presumably designed to remind Sienna she couldn't tamper with the property again. That's the same clause I benefited from, all these years later. It wasn't surprising, then, that she had singled me out. My existence and that covenant served as a constant reminder of her failed land grab. Linda advised me to gather every scrap of evidence in preparation for a possible legal confrontation. Meanwhile, Kevin quietly orchestrated a plan to put these revelations before the rest of the HOA board. Then, the bombshell dropped. A special security measure meeting was announced by Sienna, set for the following Tuesday. The agenda implied they would vote on new pool restrictions, possibly requiring a special keycard system and imposing fines on outsiders who tried to enter. It was designed, quite blatantly, to bar me permanently. The day of the meeting arrived with a tangible aura of tension. I walked into the Sunny Creek Community Center with my binder of documents, stepping into a room of about 40 residents seated in neat rows. Sienna sat at a long table at the front, flanked by a couple of board members who seemed to regard her with nervous respect. She gave me a cold stare that felt like a silent challenge. The meeting opened with mundane topics: landscaping budgets, community event suggestions, routine announcements. My heart pounded, waiting for the moment new business rolled around. When that time came, Sienna stood and read a statement about unauthorized individuals repeatedly accessing the pool, citing disruption to community peace, and calling for an immediate resolution to secure the facilities. The proposed measure was an additional fee of $200, 0 cents per household for the installation of advanced security. I raised my hand. She ignored me at first, turning instead to the board. Kevin cleared his throat, reminding her that the bylaws permitted remarks from guests if recognized by at least one board member. Another board member softly motioned that I should speak. Sienna relented with visible annoyance. That's when I laid out my documents. My lease specifying pool rights, the original covenant bearing Rowan's and the developer's signatures, the stamped county record, and copies of the boundary lines from then and now. I spoke calmly but firmly, explaining how Sienna had repeatedly tried to kick me out of a facility I was legally entitled to use. I highlighted how, on 2 occasions, she summoned police to remove me, only to have the police verify my valid documentation. I then presented Kevin's evidence that boundary lines had mysteriously shifted on some maps, broadening Sunny Creek's claimed jurisdiction without any official county approval. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Some stood to get a better look at the maps I was holding up. Sienna attempted to interrupt, but the neighbors were no longer passively listening. Several asked pointed questions. Why was there a discrepancy between old and new maps? Why had Sienna ignored legitimate documents and tried to impose fines on non-HOA properties? The suspicion in the air became palpable. That's when Kevin, with a trembling voice but resolute stance, produced a series of financial documents showing questionable payments to companies owned by Sienna's relatives. A hush fell over the room. This was no longer about a single trespassing incident. This was the moment the community realized their president had possibly been siphoning funds and manipulating boundaries for her own gain. Sienna's reaction shifted from anger to desperation. She first accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign. Then she claimed the documents were outdated or fraudulent. But Kevin's digital timestamps and row-level data from the HOA's financial software contradicted her every word. Residents asked how their dues were being spent, why certain repairs were never completed, and whether the expansions of the boundaries had been done to inflate her sense of power. Finally, under the weight of mounting accusations, Sienna snapped. She slammed a folder on the table, raising her voice about how she refused to fail again like she had once before, inadvertently hinting at the previous scandal. The hush in the room gave way to shouts for answers, with cameras rolling. Some neighbors had started filming. Sienna stormed out, declaring she would sue for defamation. The rest of the board seemed shell-shocked. One board member proposed an immediate motion to suspend Sienna pending an investigation. Several neighbors seconded it, and the motion passed with an overwhelming show of hands. I watched as the community, once so fractured by fear, collectively decided they had had enough of her tyranny. The next morning, I found an email from the HOA's official address announcing an emergency audit. Sienna was officially placed on administrative leave from her position as president. In the following weeks, more damning details spilled out. Checks written to suspicious consultants, boundary lines that had never received official county approval, and even a prior attempt to intimidate local officials into misplacing certain records. As more neighbors stepped forward, they shared tales of how Sienna had coerced or threatened them into silence. In response, Sienna did exactly what many had predicted. She filed a formal lawsuit, listing me and several others as defendants, accusing us of slander, trespassing, property damage, and any other allegation she could conjure. In a bizarre twist of fate, that lawsuit was the best thing she could have done for us. Linda promptly filed a countersuit, attaching all the evidence we had gathered and requesting a formal hearing to present it in court. Sienna had no real proof of wrongdoing on our part. Her entire case revolved around the false premise that my presence at the pool was illegal, which it clearly wasn't. Meanwhile, the court would see authentic documents showing that she had systematically tried to rewrite the boundaries and manipulate funds. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the county courthouse with Linda and Kevin by my side. By then, word had spread across Sunny Creek, and a crowd of residents showed up to witness the proceedings. Sienna arrived with her attorney, Martin Rogers, who looked polished but appeared tense when he spotted the thick binders we carried. In front of Judge Marianne Guerrero, Sienna's lawyer repeated the claim that I had no right to be on the property and had acted belligerently. Linda countered by calmly stepping through each piece of documentation. My valid lease covenant, the original developer agreement, the official notes from prior HOA boards reaffirming the arrangement, plus the suspicious boundary alterations that tried to co-opt my property into Sunny Creek's domain. She even introduced the matter of the phantom consulting fees, though that part would be handled separately. Judge Guerrero flipped through the exhibits, occasionally lifting an eyebrow. After Linda's thorough explanation, the judge turned to Sienna's lawyer. "Mr. Rogers," the judge said, "how do you propose to refute the existence of a covenant that clearly predates Ms. Kay's presidency, along with these official records that were re-signed 3 years ago under her supervision?" Rogers tried to pivot, suggesting the arrangement had expired or that there was missing context, yet Linda simply directed the judge to the county's official database, showing the covenant had no sunset provision. The judge's face betrayed mild disbelief at the flimsiness of Sienna's position. When Sienna herself took the stand, it was a tense spectacle. She stumbled over questions regarding the official boundary lines, deflected inquiries about the past allegations of forged documents, and eventually claimed she had been trying to protect the community's interests. At one point, she let slip that no one wanted a repeat of what nearly happened a decade ago, fueling further curiosity from the judge. Linda used that moment to present a summary of the property fraud attempt Sienna had orchestrated years before, which Rowan had successfully contested. The judge's expression hardened. She asked pointedly, "Miss Kay, did you submit any boundary changes without the homeowner's explicit knowledge?" Sienna evaded the question, but the damage was done. The judge ruled swiftly, dismissing Sienna's lawsuit entirely and granting partial summary judgment on our countersuit. Sienna was ordered to cover my legal fees, plus a small sum for harassment. More critical was the judge's statement that she would refer the matter to the district attorney for a deeper look at the alleged fraud and financial improprieties. Following that legal defeat, Sienna's hold over the HOA disintegrated. The interim board wasted no time in formally removing her from all leadership roles. Residents demanded a proper forensic audit, which uncovered a pattern of money misappropriation. Some of her supporters tried to distance themselves as fast as possible, claiming ignorance. Others apologized for going along with her directives. Soon, a new, transparent board was elected. Kevin took on the role of interim president. He was determined to restore trust, clarifying boundaries once and for all, and promising to ensure that every resident and neighbor with legitimate rights would be welcomed rather than harassed. A month after the hearing, I received a letter from the reformed HOA board. In that envelope was not a fine, but a formal apology for the way I'd been treated. It expressed hopes that I would accept their gesture and feel comfortable using the pool whenever I wished. Enclosed was also a brand-new pool access card and a personal note from Kevin that read, "Thank you for standing your ground. You helped us see what was happening under the surface, and we're going to ensure this never happens again." As news spread that Sienna had lost her position and might face potential legal consequences, the entire neighborhood atmosphere shifted. People from both Lakeview Estates and Sunny Creek began organizing joint gatherings. Those who had previously been too scared to speak up felt emboldened to address issues openly. The lines that once divided these two developments, literal lines Sienna had tried to manipulate, began to blur in a positive way. A sense of genuine community took shape, neighbors offering to help each other with yard work, kids forming new friendships, families hosting barbecues, inviting folks from both sides of the fence. In a strange twist, the same swimming pool that had become a battleground for rights now served as a unifying spot, a place where old tensions melted like ice cubes on a summer day. Sienna's final appearance in the neighborhood happened quietly. She packed her belongings, put her house on the market, and left without fanfare. Rumors circulated that she might have relocated closer to relatives, or that she was under investigation for her handling of HOA funds. I never confirmed whether any criminal charges were eventually pursued, but I knew the newly minted board was sharing the relevant documentation with the county. Regardless, from that moment on, Sunny Creek belonged to the people who truly cared about its well-being. The entire fiasco taught me a lesson. It's not enough to assume your rights are safe if you don't stand up for them when challenged. Karen, or any overreaching authority figure, thrives on intimidation and silence. By confronting her relentless attempts to push me away from the pool, I inadvertently shone a spotlight on everything else she was doing behind the scenes. That spotlight illuminated the manipulations, revealing just how much power a single, self-important individual could seize if left unchecked. So if you've ever felt pushed around by someone insisting you don't belong here, remember that your willingness to defend your rightful place can spark a wave of change. It might not happen overnight, but perseverance, knowledge of the law, and cooperation with allies can break even the strongest illusions of control. In my case, it began with a single confrontation at a pool, escalated with a series of petty fines, and culminated in a full-blown legal face-off. And in the end, it led to the toppling of an entrenched bully who had counted on everyone else's fear to maintain her reign. That day I swam in that pool without fear. I realized the water felt extra refreshing not only because of the hot sun, but because it symbolized the victory of truth over intimidation. My neighbors waved and smiled, greeting me with genuine warmth. I no longer felt like the target of whispers or dirty looks. A sense of belonging washed over me, stronger than any boundary line or rule book Sienna had tried to conjure. I concluded that sometimes you have to pay attention to the seemingly small injustices, because standing up for yourself can trigger a ripple effect that liberates others who were too afraid to act on their own. Before I wrap this up, let me extend a question to you. Have you ever faced a Karen in your community? Someone who tried to push you out, convinced you had no right to your space or your voice? If so, I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below, because you never know who might find the courage to speak out after reading about your experience. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if this resonates with you. By staying informed, you empower not just yourself, but the entire community around you. And ultimately, that's how we make sure that no Karen can manipulate people into silence again. Together, we can stand tall, keep our rightful seats at the pool, and ensure that the places we call home remain open, fair, and welcoming to everyone who belongs there.